I've seen several posts in forums about people having difficulties with their Tippmann Boss getting a good stitch. As I said, I thought I'd share my experience with the machine, which I bought a few years ago to help make holsters, belts, pouches, and cowboy action rigs. When I first got into leather, I did everything by hand. I still mostly do it, still do a lot of stuff by hand. But stitching is definitely my least favorite part of the process. I enjoy designing new designs, tooling leather, staining and dyeing, weathering each piece, giving each piece a unique look, all the more kind of artistic aspects of leatherworking. After that, stitching just seems kind of like a tedious but necessary chore. And things like linings, which really need to be stitched, glued and stitched, I often will just kind of leave off because they're going to be too much of a pain to do. A machine can't do everything. Toe plugs, still have to do by hand. But anyways, I was formerly using a pricking iron and doing saddle stitching, one piece of thread with a needle on either end. But I did what probably a lot of you watching or did or are thinking of doing. You said to yourself, man, hey, I could save so much time and be so much more productive if I had a sewing machine. I mean, sewing takes up probably 50% of my time. At least that's the way I explained it to my wife. So I did some research and I found that sewing machines that could sew the thickness of vegetarian leather that I was working with were not cheap, and they certainly weren't something that showed up on Craigslist or OfferUp very often. And if you did happen to find one, it was still pretty high price, even in used condition. So I saved up and I went to Tandy and I bought the 4 model. It was the only one that they had left in stock. They gave me a slight discount, but it was still dropping a lot of dough. I was stoked, man. It was, leather work was going to fly off the table. I mean, it worked great at the store. I couldn't wait to get home and just start, putting together pieces. But that's pretty much when the 4 fell out from under me. I had other problems at the start. No matter what I did, the stitches just would not come out right. You've got a bottom thread and a top thread, and they're supposed to lock together somewhat in the middle of your piece where you can't see them. Mine was not doing that. The thread was just, the bottom thread would lay on top, the top thread would lay on bottom, the stitches, the leather would just get kind of chewed up, and it would just overall look really bad. I made all kind of adjustments. I took it apart, restarted the threading process over and over again numerous times. I was following the instructions to a T. I watched the official videos that Tippmann produced. I was just trying to find everything that I was doing wrong. I scoured the internet, which did provide some useful information, which I'll get to. But anyways, just when I thought I'd had the thing dialed in right, I put an actual piece on there, and it would mess up. It would ruin it, and I lost a handful of actual pieces that way. I was really bummed, man. I was ready to tie a rope around this and use it as a boat anchor. I even put it up on Craigslist for a short time, just figuring out to cut some of my losses on it. But while it was on Craigslist, I continued to use it, and then I actually had a couple breakthroughs with it. And I learned a couple of tricks, and I did a couple of modifications to it that maybe is not generally well known. So anyways, I thought I would share my experiences with you to help any of you guys out who are having the same problems as me that I was having a few years ago. Anyways, we'll get to it. Okay, so the first thing I did was make my own flatbed attachment and base. Tippmann actually sells their own version of this, made out of metal. I've seen it online. I have not seen it in person. It always looked a little flimsy to me, though. And of course, it's pretty expensive. So I wanted to just build this myself.
because I certainly didn't want to put any more money into the machine. So I went up to my local Home Depot and got a 3/4 inch thick piece of MDF board, a small piece, and cut out a base, drilled corresponding holes to attach the machine to. The holes are actually drilled out underneath, so it can still sit flat. I have access to a router table, and I routed out a couple channels for these two uprights to sit into, a couple of support pieces, and then the actual top itself, I routed out a couple of channels to correspond to the tops up here, and then the trickiest part was getting these to the proper height so that I could get it to the same height as the machine. The notch here, I took a rounded router bit and kind of profiled out that so that it roughly corresponds to the bottom part of the boss here. So what I've got now is a nice flat, smooth, contiguous surface that basically creates a workbench up here. It's kind of hard to focus on what you're doing when you got a piece up here and you know, it's kind of hanging down, sagging around. You certainly can do it, but I just prefer to work with it like this, and I think this has been really key to getting a lot of good stitches out of the machine. And plus, it's a lot cheaper. Okay guys, so I'm going to start up here at the top and work my way down. If you hear some noises back there, that's my 3D printer back there running. Up here I've got my spool holder. This is 277 bonded nylon and just a natural color. This is pretty much all I use. It seems to be the most versatile. I did notice in the beginning as I was stitching that occasionally as the thread is being pulled down, a loop of this thread would come off the bobbin here or the spool and kind of lasso itself around the top up here along the thread guide. So what I did is I just got a what was that? It was a coat hanger. That's what it was. I just got a coat hanger, cut it up, and made a little oh, what would you call this? A little thread guide to prevent that from happening. So just to prevent that from looping around, because what would happen is it would loop around up here, and any little thing on the machine, anything that can cause extra tension up here is going to mess up your stitch down there. Hey now, stop it. So what would happen is I'd be sewing and all of a sudden my knots would come up on top, and I'm thinking, what's going on here? And I'd be looking around and I'd look up here and this thread is up here wrapped around like this, and it's causing that extra tension up here that's messing up your stitch down there. So again, you need pretty much unimpeded movement of the thread all the way from your spool all the way down to where it's being sewed at. So anyways, I've often thought about perhaps maybe using my my 3D printer to print up a whole new thread guide and whole thing up here. But if I ever get around to that, I'll let you know. Okay guys, I'm going to thread this machine the way I do it because it's a little bit different than the way they show in the instructions and on the online videos. Make sure everyone's got your instructions here ready for you. Handy, because I forgot the name of all this stuff and it's been so long since I've done this. Alright, so let's see. Alright, it's coming down from your thread guide A to your thread guide B. You're going to go back like this from the back to the front on your top hole there. Everyone following? Here we go. Then you're going to go back through the second hole from front to back. Oh man, this thing is atrociously long. Hold on. Cut that. Alright. Okay. So far, everything pretty much standard operating procedure. You're going to go around this guide post. Kind of hard to do this with the camera in the way. Alright, your secondary tensioner wheel. Remember to go, you're going to actually pull that through. That your thread actually sits up against that post in here and then is pinched with these two plates up here, alright? Don't let it just run around the outer edge of it. It's got to actually be pulled through there. Alright? Now, here's where I do things a little bit differently. I go around the primary tensioner wheel once, and then I go around the primary tensioner wheel one more time. So that's 2 times around your primary tensioner wheel. Now that's different than the way they teach you in the manual and on the online videos. They just have you going around once. But with the thickness of leather that I'm running, I need that extra tension, I guess. Alright, and then everything's pretty much standard after that. You're going to go through this. Ow, come on, man. What are you doing? Where am I at here? Gonna go through, well, come on. Through that guide post there. Make sure you kind of hold all this stuff because your thread's going to want to jump off of it. Up through your take-up arm. Alright. And then through this little hole here. Alright. Just like that. Okay. So like I said, everything is done exactly the way they show you in the manual, except you go around your primary tensioner wheel twice. That's the way I do it. That has been the key for it working for me. Try at your own risk. Alright, continuing down. We're going to take the thread, pass it through the needle foot down here, like that. I usually lift it up out of the way. I thread it through the eye of the needle, like that. Be careful sometimes as you're feeding it through that needle. It'll sometimes, the thread will sometimes loop around like that. You don't want it to do that. Just want it to go in one side and out the other. Oh, by the way, zoom out on that. Let's see. This is a little book light that I got for, I think I got it for Christmas one year. I don't read a lot of books, but I do a lot of sewing out here. So I just stuck it up here. It's got a little flexible head here that you can pretty much point anywhere you want. It's great. Down here is your bobbin. That's your bottom thread. Just follow the instructions, basically. Nothing special here. I haven't really touched this or adjusted it since I bought the machine 3 years ago or so. Some people I've seen or read about on the net almost have a superstitious way of threading this extremely carefully. They seem to attribute this to a lot of problems, the improper winding of the bobbin. And at first I was very careful about how I would wind this, but then I just kind of got tired of it and just started rolling it on there with an electric drill, with the attachment that is provided with the machine. Basically, you just don't want to roll up so much thread on here that it actually extends out from beyond the spool itself, so that it could get kind of jammed up in here and won't spin freely. Other than that, you don't really have to wind it any special way or anything. Just get it on there. Okay, so there is one additional accessory that I bought that I did go ahead and spend the money for, and that was the material guide. After I started getting the machine to stitch good stitches, and I was using it for a while, and everything was going along really great, I decided, man, I could really use a material guide. And I'll show you why here in a bit. This is one of those things that I thought that I would try to make myself. I was going to incorporate it in here somehow. But in the end, I decided that, you know what, this is going to be a really pain to do this and make it work correctly. So I did go ahead and after a time, and I saved up some money, I did shell out for the material guide. And this is almost an absolute necessity. I say almost a necessity if you're making holsters, and I will show you why here momentarily. Okay, so I was talking about the material guide attachment before and how I use it and why it's so important. One of the challenges when making a holster like this, and I've got a piece here that's already been tooled and dyed, the lining's been sewed in already, which would have been a real pain to do by hand. Looks good, looks good. Anyways, one of the challenges when you're sewing on the machine is my stitching line on the outside here has to go through all this leather and then end up on the opposite side at the exact same stitch line. So the challenge is I gotta put that needle through that line there and have it come out that line there. And it's a bit of a challenge, but this is how I do it. First, there's all sorts of glues that you can use. Contact cements. I used to use weldwood a lot because it's cheap. It's available at the hardware store. But it smells like benzene and various other toxic elements, and I'm sure will eventually kill you one day. But I use this stuff I get from Tandy, Eco Weld. It smells basically kind of like, it smells almost like Elmer's glue or something like that, and it kind of looks like watered down Elmer's glue, but it actually works really well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a thin bead of it, not a bead, but I'm going to brush a thin coat of it along the edges here. And this is contact cement, so you got to do it on both sides. Just a thin coat. I usually don't use brushes like this. I usually use the cheap glue brushes from Harbor Freight. Buy them in a big pack, but I'm currently out of those at the moment. And once that's done, oh wait, you know what? You know what I forgot to do? Hold on. Before I do that, before I can glue these two sides together, I actually need to make the holes. Before I mentioned that the Tippmann Boss can't sew everything. It won't sew toe plugs, and this holster will have a toe plug on the bottom of it. And before I sew the main seam up, I need to go ahead and make all the holes that I'm going to need to sew the toe plug in later. So I will be right back. Okay, I've had to readjust the camera so that I can get this shot and keep it out of my way. So, with our material guide, we're going to sew this holster, and I'm going to make sure to give myself some extra length on the thread so that I can use it to sew my toe plug in. Alright. Okay. Alright, so on the material guide, one of the things that I discovered was that sometimes you'll be sewing something that has a thickness shallower than the material guide itself, which measures fairly thick. It's about, what, 3/8 of an inch thick. And if you're sewing something thinner, you'd have a problem with that, because what happened is, at least using the standard foot that the machine comes with, the foot's going to come up against the material guide wheel before it comes down on the leather. So what I did is I went up and got some, what is this? This is 1/7/8 inch PVC pipe. I think it was just like a small connector, whatever was the cheapest. This allows me to basically make a shim so that if my material is slightly thinner, it'll clear the way of the presser foot before it hits. And oops, man. I've made a couple of these. Zoom this out a little bit. Okay. Sorry guys, just trying to get this camera adjusted so that it stays out of my way. Anyways, so yeah, I made some shims to use on thinner materials. But I don't think, let me look at here. Well, I might need that one. Yeah, because this holster is measuring up almost, I don't know if the camera's picking that up, it's almost at the same width. So what I'm going to do, so I'm going to just use that. Alright, get it in position here. Basically what you want to do is get it right in position so that the needle will go into your groove. I'm sure I'm going to end up editing a lot of this stuff out. Okay, so once I've got that set, my needle going exactly into that groove I've cut for it, now I'm going to take this material guide and I'm going to shove it up there pretty tight and lock it in place. Alright, so that gets me my distance. Alright, and of course I've already went ahead and used my overstitch wheel to put some marks on there just to make sure that I've got my stitch length in right. And what I'm going to be doing is as I'm sewing, I'm going to be putting pressure this way to keep those two edges tied up against that wheel.
That ensures that both this side and this side are the same, that they haven't shifted in any way. So let's do it. The first stitch is always a little hairy. First couple, actually. What I usually do is I put that in there and I grab either the top of usually the top thread, and pull it out and make sure that that knot is right in the center where it needs to be, and then you're going to hold on to it. And I come down, make sure that my needle's coming into the mark left by the overstitch wheel, so that I know I got my stitch length the right way. And until you get the first few stitches made, this thread can kind of wander around in there. But after that, good. And again, I'm keeping pressure up against that wheel. I'm watching. When you're going around curves like that, there's going to be a tendency for the stitch to shorten. Which in this particular case, on this whole thing, isn't a big deal. And look at that. That's losing some stuff on my work table here. And then what I'll do, that last stitch might be a little funky because you'll never know exactly where you're going to end up. Pull up a little bit extra here. And you can see, maybe, hopefully, stitches look pretty good. That last stitch is a little bit longer because I got to the end and realized that I wanted to go ahead and put it right into that hole that I had up here. So that's no big deal, at least to me. And you can see on this side that our stitch is going directly into the groove that I put onto the opposite side, and that's why I use the material guide. And the back stitch is always going to look a little bit more gnarly than the front. The front looks fantastic. I mean, you couldn't hand sew it better than that. Back side, not so much, but I'm going to show you how I dress that up a little bit to make those back stitches look a little bit nicer. Okay, so we're done with the stitching. I've already sewn in the toe plug. Yeah. Now to address the issue of the fact, front side stitches look really good. Boss does a really good job on that. Backside, not quite as well. I'm not sure if just pretty much all other sewing machines look like this, but anyways, this is what they look like, and this is how I deal with that. Just real quick, I go ahead and wet it down on that side. let it dry a little bit. And I take my slicker here, rub it down, just kind of basically flattening out all that leather that got kind of chomped up. It's already looking a little bit better. Now, overstitch wheel again. Make sure that's on there. So you can see. Go over. Very carefully. Okay, let's see if that'll zoom in on that. Looks a little bit better. And this is the back side of the holster, so it's not a huge deal. Once this is folded over, you won't be able to see it anyways. But you can actually get that back side to look pretty good, just depending on your leather and just kind of how much work you want to put into it. This kind of end stitch here, the videos on Tippmann have you kind of almost doing like this weird kind of double stitch. I've never had that come out look very good. What I do is I just kind of pull out the last couple of stitches here and do a saddle stitch on the end. It makes it more secure and just looks nicer. Anyways, so I'm hoping that this will help everyone. Oh, by the way, just in case, these are the needles that I use. These tend to last. This is a 10-pack. Seem to last a long time. The needle that I've currently got in the machine right now has lasted about a couple years. Let's see. Let me see if I can get that to zoom in. That's exactly. My recommendation is use this needle and nothing else. Anyways, hopefully this will help some of you guys out. I'll see you later.